Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching 6th part of What If Naruto and Sasuke Travel Back in Time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
The days leading up to the Chunin exams were mostly calm and relaxing. Particularly to the exhausted genin. They hadn't realized how hard they had worked and how tense they were until they were given the opportunity to relax. Needless to say, they had a good time. The Konoha 12 met early the morning of the exam in front of the academy. They had agreed to arrive early in order to get a better assessment of the other examinees. They had gone in blind the last time, and some of them had nearly died as a result. They wanted to be as prepared as possible this time. They entered the building and proceeded to the classroom, completely ignoring the genjutsu and chunin beneath it. With their jonin's approval, they entered and took positions near but not next to each other. They then engaged in a game of waiting. Naruto had dozed off on his desk by the time the last of the competitors arrived, and Sasuke was trying in vain to wake him without drawing attention to themselves. Needless to say, it didn't work. He sighed and sat back in his chair, waiting. He was absent-mindedly rubbing the hidden seal on his arm. Naruto had finished it the night before, and it had hurt when he applied it. It didn't hurt as much as the evil sealing method used by Kakashi the first time, but it was still painful. Sasuke couldn't help but snicker when he noticed a flash of silver. They had positioned themselves in such a way that Orochimaru's spy, Kabuto, couldn't get close enough to offer information without drawing attention to himself. Furthermore, he had no reason to approach him this time because they weren't making a scene. Naruto and Sasuke had both agreed that if the boy approached them, they would most likely hit him, which is why they chose the location that they did. He was glad they had thought of it ahead of time rather than trying to control themselves when it happened. He closed his eyes and stretched his senses as he leaned back in his chair. He never liked to push them too far, but he also didn't want to expose himself. He smirked as he picked up the examiners in the room next to theirs. They were looking for a commotion to walk into. Unfortunately, they would have to wait a while unless another team started it. It appears they grew tired of waiting. Several minutes later, just as the examiners entered the room, Sasuke thought to himself. Okay, maggots. Pay attention because I will not repeat myself. Morino Ibiki here, and I will be your first examiner for these exams. I want everyone to form a line and hand in their applications one at a time, while also receiving their assigned seat. There is no talking. Do I make myself clear if you haven't turned in your applications within the next 10 minutes? The genin jumped to their feet and made their way to the front of the room to do as they were told. Sasuke turned to shake Naruto one last time, only to see him halfway across the room. How on earth does he do that? He considered following the Rokudame. Everyone was seated quickly, and Sasuke found himself holding back a laugh as he noticed the entire team had received their original seats. Looking back to the front, he noticed Ibiki smirking at the gullible genin. Okay, then pay attention. The examination consists of 10 questions. The last question will be asked 15 minutes before the time limit expires, and you will only have 1 hour to complete the task. We will not respond to any questions. Every genin will begin with a perfect score. For each incorrect answer, you will lose points. If you are caught cheating, your score will be reduced, and if you are caught 3 times, you and your team will be disqualified from the exam. You will fail the exam if you receive a 0. If any member of your team gets a 0, the entire team fails. So, do you have any questions? The examiner's sweat dropped as a hand raised in the back at the stupidity. Ibiki looked around and nodded after removing the genin and his team. Begin. With the help of Jonin. Isn't it quiet without the genin? Asuma stated that he was stretching. Kakashi laughed and looked at the man. Even when they're training, it's quiet. As he looked up at the ceiling, the Jonin chuckled. Morino Ibiki, you say? Unfortunately, he will not faze the kids. Do you think he'll yell at us later because we made them immune to psychological warfare? Probably. Kakashi responded by turning the page of his book. Ibiki. Aren't you the T&I expert in Konoha? Zabuza inquired, sitting beside the two. Yup. It's too bad the kids aren't as easily scarred anymore. After 45 minutes. Put your pencils down. It is now time for the final question. However, before we begin, there are a few more ground rules to cover. You may begin by answering the question. If you do not respond to the question, you will receive an automatic 0 and fail. Of course, we're going to accept it. From the crowd, a blonde yelled. However, if you take the question and get it wrong, you and your team will fail and be barred from taking the exams for the rest of your life. Ibiki couldn't help but smirk as angry shouts of disbelief rang out. This year's rules are as follows, follow them. Raise your hand now if you want to refuse the question. As the genin dropped out, hand after hand began to raise, refusing to be stuck at the bottom tier forever. Ibiki noticed, however, that a group of 12 people seemed completely unaffected as they stared at him confidently. His gaze was drawn to the Hyuga heiress and the village outcast. Didn't Kakashi perform a miracle on these two? You appear to be confident in your ability to answer this question. Are you certain you'll be able to make it? I am a ninja. I have no choice in the matter. I don't get to choose my missions, and I don't get to choose how much information I get before accepting a mission. If the intelligence is incorrect, I cannot simply refuse to complete the mission because it is more difficult than I was told. So your scare tactics are ineffective on me. Naruto answered calmly. And how about you, Miss Hyuga? I'm not afraid. I, too, am wearing the hidden leaf headband. As the future matriarch of the Hyuga clan, I will have to make decisions like this all the time, and if I spend my time worrying about which decision I make and whether it is the right one, the clan may fall before I can save them. Hinata responded. Ibiki nodded and looked around the room, which had significantly emptied. Ibiki returned to the front of the room after the proctors all nodded. That's great. Everyone who remained passed the first of the Chunin exams. Congratulations. What? Where is the 10th question? That was question number 10. Everyone's eyes widened as Naruto responded quietly. It was, indeed, a question. They just never imagined it would be a question. So the rest of this was for naught? Asand Kunoichi exclaimed. That was to put your information gathering abilities to the test. You may not get all of the intel on a mission, and you may not get any intel at all. When you lead your teams as a Chunin, you must gather the information required to make an informed decision. Chunin, as Blondie stated, do not have the option of refusing a mission simply because they received incorrect or no intelligence. They must adapt and gather information on their own. Then, using that knowledge, they can lead their team to a successful mission with the fewest injuries or casualties. So they weren't completely useless. This section of the exam tested your ability to gather information, analyze a situation, and lead your team despite the odds. As a result, everyone in this room has passed the first RO. A black blur shattered the window as it flew through it. Anko, you're late yet again. Anko just looked around and laughed sheepishly. There are still many genin Ibiki. Are you softening up? No. This year's crop is simply excellent. That won't matter because their numbers will be cut in half when I'm finished. Everyone pay attention to me because I am the second proctor of the Chunin exams. Ibiki shook his head and looked over to where the blonde had been sitting as the teens shuffled out of the room. He was certain the kid hadn't even picked up his pencil once, but the test was perfectly filled out in extremely neat handwriting. "How did you pull off that miracle, Kakashi?" "Okay, everyone, welcome to Training Ground 44, also known as the Forest of Death. The second phase of the exam will take place here. Before entering, each team will be given either a Heaven or Earth scroll, and your task will be to retrieve the opposite scroll and travel to the tower in the center of the forest in 5 days. You will only pass the exams if you enter with both scrolls and all of your teammates alive. To obtain the other scroll, you must steal it from another team, and everything is permitted. Even murder. 5 days.
Enko smirked sadistically as one of the genin yelled out.
Yes. Furthermore, whether you pass or fail, you will spend the entire 5 days in the forest. If we remember, someone will come to get you after the second round. Before I send you all to your deaths, I need you to sign these forms, which absolve Konoha and its nin of any liability for your deaths in the exam. We don't want to start a war over this, do we? Anyway, once your team has signed them, have a team representative bring them over there and hand them in for your scroll. The exam will start in an hour. This was the longest hour of our lives. Ino spoke quietly to her team. Despite the fact that they had done extensive training for this, she was still concerned about this round. After all, if what Sasuke and Naruto said was true, they'd be attacked by a Sannin inside. Perhaps, Shikamaru said. The hour flew by, almost too quickly for some of the genin, and they were all standing in front of one of the gates before they knew it. Sasuke inhaled deeply and nodded to Naruto, who returned it. They vanished from view as soon as the gates opened and the timer began, flying through the forest. They had devised a strategy for this. The first step was to ambush another team and steal the scroll as quickly as possible. They planned to hide both scrolls and gather another set, which, if everything went as planned, would be destroyed by Orochimaru. Sasuke would drop the act as soon as Orochimaru had left the area, and they would rush to the tower. They wanted as much time as they could to plan their strategy for the next round. It was easier than they expected to find the scrolls they required. That realization alone made them realize how unprepared they had been the first time. Slowing their pace in the same spot where they were attacked, Naruto motioned for Hinata to brace herself as they were hit by a massive wind jutsu almost instantly. Naruto, like the last time, let himself be carried away by the wind. He quickly rose to his feet, sidestepped the snake that lunged at him, and drew a sword from one of his many storage seals. He quickly severed the snake's head with his wind chakra and spun as he heard clapping. "We thought you were the weakest student in your class. Oh well, this should be entertaining." As they lunged at the blonde, one of Orochimaru's men said. "This never happened before. Or was it supposed to if I had managed to avoid being eaten by the snake?" Naruto reflected to himself. He was concerned that too much of his skill would be revealed, as well as how much had changed. He had fought Kiba before and had just barely won thanks to the 5-pronged seal. Ino had been eliminated from the tournament in a tie with Sakura, but not now. Sakura wasn't even taking the exams, and Ino had been trained. When he returned to the fight, he sighed, realizing that his body had been on autopilot the entire time. After cleaning his blade, he sealed it and went in the direction he knew Sasuke would be. On the other hand, Sasuke was growling. It was becoming increasingly difficult to refrain from deviating from how the fight had gone the previous time with a few key differences. He didn't freak out this time, and he kept his cool. He was also fighting more strategically. However, the desire to simply kill the snake and be done with it was almost overwhelming. Fortunately, he didn't have to fight the urge for long because Orochimaru decided to stop playing games. Excellent work, Sasuke. You are indeed strong, and I believe you have a fully matured Sharingan as well. After all, you might be as good as Itachi. I believe I'll leave you with a gift. Just shut up and get this over with. Sasuke mentally groaned. He had no idea how much Orochimaru enjoyed talking. Just as Sasuke felt Orochimaru's fangs pierce his skin, he remembered how the exam went the first time. Karen. I had forgotten about her. To save her, we'll have to leave a clone behind before entering the tower. He reflected as Orochimaru stepped back and Naruto slid next to him. What have you done to Teme? Naruto insisted on making Sasuke groan. He had to force himself to black out after falling into the act of the seal taking root. Fortunately, the snake Sannin left before he had to. Sasuke, he's gone. Should we? Someone should leave a clone behind. Do you recall Karen? Yeah. I saved her life from a bear after I first arrived and we were struggling to find another scroll. She will die this time if no one intervenes. Alright. Where in the forest did you run into her? Naruto dispatched a transformed shadow clone to search for the redhead, after which they dashed for the tower at full speed. It didn't take them long to arrive because of their training. They laughed at Iruka's expression as they opened the scrolls. The poor Chunin had not yet recovered from their light sparring session a few days before. Hello. Please inform the old man that Orochimaru is in the forest. I came into contact with one of his snakes. Naruto chirped as soon as they were given permission to leave. Iruka shook his head and dashed off to see the Hokage. What now, Dobi? Now we await the summons to speak with the old bastard. How do we explain the seal to him? I discovered a seal in the clan scrolls we retrieved from Gado's place that isolates the seal and its effects, making you immune. Or something like that. You can be an idiot at times. You're welcome. The summons from the Hokage came quickly, and when they arrived, they found a bruised Anko in the room. Did you really meet Orochimaru? I came across one of his snake summons and caught a glimpse of him before he flew off to who knows where. Naruto chirped, causing Sandame to groan. How about you and your partner? Are you referring to the man who gave me this hickey? Sasuke said as casually as he could while holding the cursed seal. Yes. Then, yes, I met the pedophile. I doubt that Orochimaru is a pedophile as well as a traitor. Hirazen's words trailed off at the end due to the genin's expressions. Anyo. He did stalk a 13-year-old boy in a dark forest and force himself on him, even if it was only with his teeth. And he left a hickey. I believe that qualifies, correct? The room froze as Hinata squeaked. Well, when you put it like that. Anko trailed off, turning pale at all the things she couldn't remember. However, we need to seal that mark right away. Why? Because Sasuke Orochimaru can use it to influence you, and we don't want that to happen. Furthermore, I cannot allow you to use its power. Really? It's just that there hasn't been any pain or discomfort other than the initial sting of the bite. I think he made a mistake or something. As he looked at the boy in front of him, Hirazen's eyes nearly popped out of his head. Did Itachi do anything that night to protect him from Orochimaru? Or is it something entirely different? I'm curious if it has anything to do with their new behavior. To be on the safe side, Kakashi performs the sealing. Sir, yes. Come with me, Sasuke. Sasuke left the room, nodding to his Jonin, and Naruto tilted his head at the Hokage. May Hinata and I go now? Please don't tell anyone what happened in the forest, okay? Yes, Hokage-sama, sir. They sang a song before being dismissed. Hiruzen shook his head and looked out the window, deep in thought. What is going on these days? As each team began to trickle into the hall, the remaining days flew by for the genin. Naruto continued to explore, nodding to familiar faces. Sasuke and him had agreed that they would only use what was required to win their matches, unless they went up against one of Orochimaru's men. They would have gladly dealt with Kabuto and his team right away if it hadn't drawn too much attention to themselves, and killing Konoha would have done just that. Naruto tuned out the Sandame's speech as the genin gathered in the arena at the end of the exams. Now, if anyone wishes to forfeit, they may do so now. Like when Kabuto left and everyone looked up at the board in front of them. This was the decisive moment to see how much things had changed. They hoped that there wouldn't be too many issues or changes in the matches, as this would make it impossible to predict when the invasion would begin. The first match will take place. The first match will feature Akado Yoroi taking on Uchiha Sasuke. Hayate exclaimed. Naruto mentally nodded as the match was identical. The only difference this time will be how much damage Sasuke does. He reflected to himself. As Hayate waited for the last of the competitors to make their way to the balcony, he kept his gaze fixed on the two fighters in front of him. The Hokage had directed that all proctors pay special attention to Team 7 in particular. He had no idea why, but as he stared at the Uchiha survivor, he realized that the boy was unconcerned about the older genin in front of him. He also didn't appear arrogant. He appeared to have already devised an attack strategy and was just waiting for the right moment to strike. It's nothing like a genin. More like an experienced jonin on the front lines of a war. He pondered. Begin. The word had barely left his mouth when Yoroi slammed into the wall behind him after a devastating punch to the face that Hayate hadn't even seen. Sasuke stood where Yoroi had stood, fist extended. Get up. That cannot possibly be enough to defeat you. Yoroi slowly pulled himself up, and Sasuke growled. Yoroi cursed as he looked at his target through his glasses. If Sasuke was that powerful and quick, he wouldn't be able to hold back, which would blow his cover. However, if he held back, he wouldn't be able to put him to the test as Orochimaru had requested. Unfortunately, he didn't have much time to think because the genin was in front of him again, this time with a spin kick to the face. I can't even find him. He practically screamed in his head. Sasuke's third kick caught him off guard as he flawlessly performed the shadow dance and launched him into the air. Sasuke began his Shishi Renden, just as he had the first time. The addition of Raiden Chakra to each blow was the difference this time. He's never going to get up or walk again. As he slammed his foot into the spy's midsection, the ribs gave way beneath his foot. Sasuke rose to his feet and made his way to the balcony. The winner is Uchiha Sasuke. Hayate exclaimed in shock. Despite fighting another Leaf Nin, the match had shown a surprising amount of brutality and no restraint. Furthermore, the Uchiha appeared unconcerned about his opponent's condition. Hayate had never imagined a genin could move as quickly as he did, and to top it all off, the match had only lasted 30 seconds. Sasuke received a high five from his friend as he approached the balcony and leaned against the railing to wait. The next match will pit Tsuchi-kin against Nara Shikamaru. Shikamaru sighed as the two took their positions. Begin. Shikamaru jumped away from his opponent, drew a handful of kunai, and launched them around the ring. Ignoring Kin's mockery of his aim, he extended his shadows and caught the girl before she realized what had happened. He reached down and grabbed an imaginary weapon as he walked her towards one of his kunai. Kin, unfortunately, grabbed a real one. He looked at Hayate while holding it to his throat. "Call the game. Otherwise, I will be forced to end her life," he exclaimed. Kin's eyes widened as she realized the gravity of her situation. All he had to do was push his fictitious kunai further into her throat, and she would bury the sharp object, ending her own life. The winner is Nara Shikamaru. Hayate called in shock after seeing another half-minute match. Shikamaru collected his kunai and headed for the balcony without saying anything. Hayate nodded slightly as he returned his gaze to the board. The next match will be Abumi Zaku vs. Aburame Shino. The fighters arrived quickly, and he began the match with a quick nod. Shino once again surrounded his opponent and forced his hand, then promptly blowing them off as Zaku refused to quit and used plugged wind tunnels. Hayate exhaled a sigh. The new genin were making the older shinobi wonder what they had been doing during their genin days, despite displaying almost none of their skills. Naruto was nodding to himself on the balcony. So far, the matches had been the same. But that was about to change, and he was aware of it. There was no way the matches could continue without Sakura or Kiba. When the next match was announced, he was proven correct. Tsurugi Masumi vs. Hyuga Hinata. Naruto raised an eyebrow as the competitors made their way down. Masumi isn't going to fight Kankuro? Interesting. How are you going to deal with him? Begin. Masumi, like before, wasted no time wrapping around his opponent. Unlike before, however, his opponent did not have a puppet to switch with. "I'll break your neck if you don't give up." "I see." Hinata responded that her Byakugans had activated as soon as Hayate gave the go-ahead. You send chakra through your limbs to disconnect your joints, allowing you to move freely and use your entire body to restrain your opponent. Unfortunately, you seem to have forgotten about the Hyuga clan's taijutsu. I understand what it does. You can't, however, use your hands to turn off my tenketsu. Admit it, you can't win. What kind of ninja do you think I am? Masumi raised an eyebrow, but before he could ask, he felt as if his entire body had caught fire. He fell to the ground after releasing the kunoichi because his technique failed to reverse itself. He realized he was on fire at that point. The Hyuga is regarded as a chakra expert because they are not limited in the number of tenketsu from which they can consciously release chakra. The medics might be able to reconnect your joints, but they'll never be able to repair the tenketsu I shattered. She muttered as she turned to walk away. The medics rushed forward as soon as Hayate called the match, quickly dousing the flames and carrying Masumi away to be treated as soon as possible. Naruto smiled and nodded to Hinata, who blushed slightly before leaning against her future husband. Hiruzen kept a close eye on the heiress. He'd never heard of a Hyuga attack based on fire. The clan was so committed to tradition that they refused to deviate from the chakra-based taijutsu style at all. Innovative techniques and stylistic changes were discouraged, and in some cases, punished. Yet, Hinata had just used an elemental version of the Jukin, raising the question of whether the clan was even aware of it. Uzumaki Fu vs. Sabaku no Kankuro. At the match, Naruto snorted and shook his head. He laughed as he focused on his friend. I guess Kankuro isn't going to make the finals this time. I'm curious how that will affect things. That's an excellent point. Perhaps Shino will get his chance this time. Idiot. After cutting the link, the two refocused on the match ahead of them. When Fu sprinted at Kankuro, he was mentally ranting about how unfair his match would be. Cockily, he allowed the attack to make contact and then immediately regretted it when the puppet practically exploded beneath her fist, raining a shower of wood, poisoned weapons, and fabric. He began to consider his options as he stared in shock at the girl. Surprised? Fu laughed before launching at him. He watched in horror as the ground exploded from her attack, barely escaping her blow. Ignoring the orders he had been given, he looked at the proctor, who, like himself, was in awe of her strength. I give up. I doubt there is anyone who can stand up to that kind of power. Fu paused mid-charge and pouted, all the while laughing with Chome about the looks she was getting from everyone. Uzumaki Fu is the winner. Konkuro retreated quickly and mournfully after gathering his puppet's remains. The screen flashed once more, drawing everyone's attention in the room. Rock Lee vs. Sabaku no Tamari. Naruto was becoming concerned. Was Tenten going to fight Gaara if Lee was fighting Tamari? If not, who will? He was worried that another of his friends would be hurt, and he wasn't sure he could let that happen. Begin. Tamari was about to move when an unnoticed attack slammed into her midsection, launching her across the room and into a wall. Unfortunately for the Sand Kunoichi, she passed out immediately. Hayate cleared his throat, his sweat falling on the boy. The winner is Rock Lee. Naruto sighed and shook his head. None of the Suna nins possessed the speed to compete with Lee. Lee only lost the first time because of Gaara's sand armor, Shukaku, and his own recklessness. Tenten vs. Karui. Karui? Was her team there the first time? In shock, Naruto questioned himself. He cursed himself for not noticing the difference when he looked over the participants again. How could he have forgotten about their presence in the village? Sasuke appeared to be thinking the same thing as him. How had he missed the presence of the Kumo Kunoichi? Begin. Tenten grinned and unsealed one of her own as Karui unsheathed her sword, making the redhead glare. Do you really believe you can beat me at Kenjutsu? You certainly exude confidence. Konoha isn't exactly known for its swordplay. That may be true, but if I don't try, I'll never know how I compare to swordsmen from other countries. Tenten replied, then dashed forward, startling the Kumo nin. She shook off her shock and began to try to end the fight as soon as possible. She quickly discovered, however, that the girl in front of her was no pushover. Despite coming from a village that valued bloodlines and ninjutsu, she appeared to be more than just adept with the blade she held. Karui clenched her teeth and went blow for blow with Tenten. Tenten, on the other hand, was carefully watching the Kunoichi for flaws. She realized that the longer she matched the girl, the angrier she became and the sloppier her attacks became. She began to exploit the gaps left by her opponent, nodding to herself as she devised a strategy. Karui's irritation grew as she gradually but steadily lost the match. How? In Kenjutsu, how could a Konoha nin compete with her? She cursed as she felt the weight of her sword slip from her grip. Pretty good for a Konoha nin. She snarled. After she lost her sword, the only option she had was taijutsu. She had never expected to be beaten in Kenjutsu and had therefore avoided learning any ninjutsu. Tenten, unfortunately, had been trained by a taijutsu master. The taijutsu battle only lasted a few moments before she was defeated and pinned. Tenten wins. Standing Tenten extended her hand to the Kumo nin for assistance. That was a good fight, but you got angry too quickly and focused solely on your Kenjutsu. She said this while smiling. How do you know? I used to be the same as you. I was so focused on my Bukajutsu that any futon user could have beaten me. Then, thanks to my idiot sensei, I ended up in a joint training session with some other teams, and I realized how weak I was in comparison to them by focusing solely on the one thing I had a natural talent for. So I started working on the other aspects of ninja life and have grown so much stronger as a result. Karui was stunned as she responded. She shook her head and picked up her sword, ignoring Tenten's hand. She returned to her team quietly, contemplating the girl's words. Hyuga will play next. Omoi vs. Neji. Almost everyone was tense and nervous because of the match. After the kidnapping debacle 9 years prior, there was no love lost between Kumo and the Hyuga clan. So no one knew what was going to happen next. Especially for those who were well aware of Neji's rage following his father's death. Omoi, on the other hand, appeared unconcerned about his teammates. "Oh man, this is the worst possible matchup for me. If I hurt Neji, the Hyuga clan will be angry and may even go after Kumo, which will make Raikage-sama angry despite the fact that he agreed to someone getting hurt in the exams, and then he'll declare war on Konoha, which will start the 4th Shinobi War and all of the countries will get involved, which will end up destroying Kumo and it will all be my fault." Neji cleared his throat and sweat dropped at the nin. "Are you finished imagining the worst-case scenario for an expected outcome in a ninja fight?" Neji said this while activating his Byakugans. Aside from the fact that this is a fight to see who will continue in the exam, the clan has nothing to do with it. Omoi shook his head and reached for his sword, waiting for the start signal. As soon as they got the go-ahead, Neji charged forward, catching a Kumo nin off guard with unexpected speed and landing a palm strike to Omoi's midsection, launching him a few feet back. Neji kept going, sealing all of the tenketsu in Omoi's arms and legs, rendering him helpless and unable to continue the match. The winner is Hyuga Neji. You only lost because you were too focused on what-if scenarios rather than your opponent and surroundings. If we all lived in fear of what-ifs, nothing would ever get done and the world would never progress. If you don't change, the same thing will happen to you as a ninja. Neji bit out coldly and returned to his team, causing everyone to breathe a sigh of relief that they weren't aware they were holding. Samui vs. Kinuta Dosu will be the next match, Hayate announced as soon as Omoi was off the floor. Despite the two members of her team's performance, Samui appeared unfazed as she made her way down. She kept her gaze on the man, lingering on the device attached to his arm. It didn't look natural or like a protective gauntlet to her. The source of his attacks, most likely a futon or a sound system. Fighter in close combat. I'll only have one chance to disable that device before being caught in the jutsu, she reasoned. Begin. She drew her tanto and waited for her opponent to move, keeping a close eye on him. As he drew his sleeve up and charged, Samui realized her analysis of his fighting style was correct and quickly dropped under his attack, bringing her tanto up and severing his arm from his body before decapitating him. She swayed as she stood but managed to regain her balance. The gauntlets launch a sound-based attack on the victim's eardrums, disrupting their balance and perception. If you ask me, it's a ninjutsu-genjutsu hybrid. That's not cool. She walked away from the corpse, cleaning her blade. Samui is the winner. Yamanaka Ino vs. Akamichi Choji is the next match. The matchup caused Ino and Choji's eyes to widen. They had never anticipated being pitted against each other. They were blissfully unaware of Naruto's internal struggle as they made their way to the floor. Only Gaara, Haku, and I remain. If I fight Gaara now, things might get out of hand and he might release Shukaku too soon. Or I may be required to demonstrate more of my abilities than I am prepared to demonstrate. The same thing will happen if Haku confronts Gaara. Can she beat him? I was the only Jinchuriki she had ever faced, and I couldn't release the 9 tails at the time. He noticed his pulse quickening. Begin. In contrast to the previous matches, neither combatant moved when the signal was given. Instead, they stared each other down, attempting to figure out how to fight without revealing too much of their abilities. Ino gritted her teeth, drew a handful of senbon, and dashed forward. While Choji was about to punch her, she jumped back and quickly launched the senbon while his arm was still obscuring his vision. She quickly began weaving hand seals after landing on the ground. She knew her clan's techniques would be useless against Choji. As a result, she used some of the other techniques she had learned. Meanwhile, Choji was going through his own internal conflict. As he drew the last of the senbon, he looked at Ino and cursed as the last of her seals was created. He began spinning and heading towards Ino after quickly activating both the Baika no Jutsu and the Nikuden Sensha. He could only hope she moved to the side. Ino, on the other hand, had other plans. She slammed her hands against the ground and released her jutsu after waiting until Choji was almost on top of her. Ranga no Jutsu, Doten. A wall of earth rose quickly from the ground beneath Akamichi, who was oblivious to it, and launched him high into the air. Ino launched a hail of kunai with ninja wire attached to form a net while Choji was in the air. That won't work because he's moving too quickly and is too heavy for the wire to support. Karui laughed. As Choji fell and collided with the net, several kunai were yanked from the ground, weakening the net. Despite this, it held and bounced the Akamichi back into the air. Despite this, he returned to the arena floor and continued on his way. Only this time he collided with the crater left by Fu's fight and lost control of his momentum, slamming into a wall. As he drew himself away, he looked over at Ino, who seemed rather pleased with herself. Nice evasion, Ino. He complimented her, making her smile even wider. Thank you, but this is still my victory, Choji. What do you think of me? The Akamichi trailed off as his eyes rolled and he collapsed unconscious on the ground. Ino moved her head. You'd think that after years of friendship, he'd remember that I work in a flower shop. As the confusion faded, Omoi's eyes widened. Poison. She had a sedative on those senbon. She was simply waiting for it to kick in. In awe, he whispered. Even Karui had to admit that it was a brilliant strategy for dealing with the Akamichi clan. Yamanaka Ino was the winner. Momochi Yuki Haku will face Uzumaki Naruto in the final match. Sabaku no Gara will receive a pass to the next round due to the uneven number of combatants. Haku yelled out almost immediately to the assembled ninja. I have no chance of defeating Naruto right now, so I forfeit. Even the Sandame's eyes widened in surprise. The girl had forfeited against the one genin who had everyone's attention. Furthermore, it was no secret that she had been trained by Zabuza himself and was regarded as stronger than him by the former Kiri Nin. That implied Naruto, the village prankster, was more powerful than an A-ranked Nuke Nin. Very good. Uzumaki Naruto was declared the winner by forfeit. If I can get all of the finalists down to the arena, we'll be able to finish this phase of the exams. We'd like everyone to pick a number from this box and tell us what it is. As Anko approached with a box containing small slips of paper, Hayate said. The genin read off their numbers one by one. The numbers were read out one by one, and by the time the last one was chosen, the Hokage had turned and looked at the genin. The following are the matchups for the final round of the Chunin exams, which will take place in 1 month. Match 1 pits Sasuke against Rock Lee. Shikamaru vs. Shino in the second match. Ino vs. Fu in the third match. Fourth match. Neji vs. Hinata. Naruto vs. Samui in the fifth match. Sixth match. Gaara vs. Ten. Some people's eyes widened in surprise as he read. The winners of matches 1 and 2 will then face off against the winners of matches 3 and 4, as well as matches 5 and 6. This will continue until only one fight remains. Questions? As he considered the matches, Naruto found himself ignoring the old man once more. He thought many of them were fine, but Tenten's match worried him. He could only hope that she would forfeit this time, unlike the previous time when she had sustained unnecessary injuries. He was also concerned about his second-round match against Gaara. Is that when the invasion will begin? Will Orochimaru wait until Sasuke is given a challenge? Is Shukaku going to be released during the game? There were far too many questions and far too few answers to be of any assistance. Sighing, he followed his team out of the room and then into the forest, pondering. He soon found himself in front of his apartment complex. I'm not going to let things get out of hand. I'll just have to prepare for everything, which means finding a quiet place to practice my family's jutsu. I'm curious if the old man will allow me to train in Uzu for the next month. He mused aloud before disappearing into the empty apartment. Many genin in Konoha were thinking the same thing, wondering what would happen next month. Hokage-sama, please grant me permission to leave the Hidden Leaf and return to Uzu to prepare for the next phase of the exam. Hiruzen looked up from the paper he was reading and at the blonde genin in front of him. How come you can't train in Konoha? I was hoping to use some experimental jutsu that I had been considering in order to gain control of the chakra of the Nine Tails. Neither of which, I believe, would be a good idea in the Hidden Leaf. If visiting shinobi detect Biju chakra so close to the village, they may become alarmed. Naruto spoke as if he were delivering a mission report. Hiruzen leaned back and gazed at the boy in front of him. He was still unsure about his changes, and he was taking a lot of chances by letting him out of his sight as much as he already had. At the same time, he made an excellent point about the techniques he intended to work on. However, was it safe to let him leave the village again while his loyalties were still being questioned? Sighing, he felt his eyes widen as he considered a solution. In Konoha, there is a former student of mine. I'll let you go if you can persuade him to accompany you. If you can't, I'll deny it. You have until tomorrow at this time. If you lose control of the Nine Tails, he will be able to defuse the situation. I wonder if it will go as well as it did the last time. Naruto sighed, knowing exactly what the Sandaime had in mind. At the same time, he was unsure whether he was ready to face the Toad Sannin. Jiraiya's death had been difficult for him, but even before his death, Naruto realized how little the Sannin had taught him. When he began training with B, he realized how far behind the other Jinchuriki, let alone his peers, he was. After all, he had only polished his taijutsu, learned how to dispel genjutsu, though he was still bad at it, gained some control over Kurama's chakra, and learned more about the Sannin's writing style than he had hoped in 2.5 years. At the same time, Sasuke and Sakura had learned to compete with, and even outperform, their teachers. While he adored the Sannin, he had no choice but to accept that Jiraiya had put him at a significant disadvantage when he struggled to reach the level he required during the Fifth War. Especially when he attempted to fight without using Senjutsu or Kurama's chakra. At the time, he was nothing more than a sitting duck. Outside of the Rasengan and its variants, they were the only things that made him even remotely dangerous at the time. In all honesty, he had learned more in the short time he had spent with B on that turtle than he had in almost all of his time as a Konoha ninja. It's really unfortunate. Naruto had been so preoccupied with the subject that he had missed when he agreed to the proposal and left Sandaime's office for the hot springs. After all, the best place to look for Jiraiya would be somewhere he could conduct his research. That was yet another thing that irritated Naruto about Jiraiya. Jiraiya would be spying on women and not paying attention most of the time they were training, if they were anywhere near civilization. It was almost as if his hormones took precedence over his godson. Before his thoughts could continue, Naruto was jolted back into reality by perverted giggling. "Hello, old man. You know the kunoichi and they are going to kill you if they find out you're spying on them and corrupting the village youth, right? Naruto screamed loud enough for the hot springs to hear him. Jiraiya paled, and before he could flee, he was pelted by kunai of all things. So, where did they hide those in their towels? As he fled the scene, desperately running for his life as the kunoichi pursued, he looked back and saw Naruto laughing on the ground. If it's the last thing I do, I'll get even with that kid, he vowed. His panic had caused him to overlook the fact that it had been his own godson who had given him away. As the rest of the women emerged from the hot springs fully dressed and apparently armed to the teeth, Naruto couldn't help but pale and stop laughing. Karui, Samui, and Anko were among them, their expressions predicting a painful death. After answering their questions about who had been spying on them, Naruto simply pointed in the direction Jiraiya had gone. I can't help but feel sorry for the man now. No, I don't. He deserves it for spying on his parents' wedding night. Hinata could have been in there, too. Naruto didn't see Jiraiya's hide or hair for hours afterwards, and it wasn't until he decided to return to Sasuke's for the evening that he caught a glimpse of the Sannin. Naruto smirked as he ran in his direction, realizing the man was preoccupied with ogling yet another girl. He felt his old prankster side resurface as he got closer to the two, so he transformed into a nondescript, easily forgettable kid and walked into sight. There you are, Oji-san. I've been looking everywhere for you since you abandoned me at the park. Oba-san will not be pleased to learn that you have resumed your flirting. I'm hungry and want to go home, but I can't because you have the house keys. Naruto moaned. Jiraiya paled as the girl he had been flirting with gave him a disgusted look and stormed away, slapping him across the face. Jiraiya growled and turned to face the threat, only to be met with his godson's icy stare. Something needs to be discussed, Godfather. Naruto hissed in a low tone, causing whatever color Jiraiya still possessed to flee the man's face. Naruto used the Shunshin to teleport them away from the area and onto an empty training ground, grabbing the man's arm before he could flee or protest. Naruto had already placed security seals around the area by the time Jiraiya recovered from his unexpected trip. Should we begin now? Now, wait a minute, kid. After all, Mom and Dad practically begged your permission to name me Jiraiya after the main character in your only decent book. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed as Naruto countered. Who told you that? Does it make a difference? After all, you weren't planning on it. In fact, no one ever says anything to me. Except for him, that is. When it comes to my past and the circumstances surrounding the attack 12 years ago, I have only had one honest person in my life. Only one person in an entire village. Who? Who else is going to tell the foxbrat anything but the Kyuubi? Naruto retorted angrily. The venomous tone directed at both him and the village made the old Sannin flinch. The 9 tails, Jesus Christ. Why are you paying attention to that beast? Why should I not? As I previously stated, and when you were apparently not listening because he is the only person who has ever been truthful with me. Naruto exploded. Jiraiya turned and began to pace, letting out a loud string of curses as he tried to think of a solution. If you even suggest or attempt to tighten the seal in any way, I will completely cut you out of my life. Now I have a question for you. Are you going to accept your responsibility as my godfather and accompany me to my chosen training field to prepare for the next round of exams or not? Where would you like to go? I'd like to return to Uzu. Unfortunately, the Sandaime will not let me go unless you are present because he still believes that not only could I be a traitor, but that I am incapable of controlling the 9 tails or defending myself. Because I want to work on more destructive techniques and controlling Kyuubi's chakra, I don't want to do it in Konoha if I can avoid it. What I work on, however, will not change regardless of where I am. The only question is whether you will allow the other country's shinobi to freak out when they detect the Biju chakra. I see how difficult that would be to work on in the village. Jiraiya muttered. Why is your loyalty being called into question? Because I finally stopped hiding my true skill and stopped being the obedient little drone that jumps on command. So, of course, I have to be a spy or work for someone else, right? That is absurd. That's ninja territory. Naruto yelled, causing the Sannin to recoil as if bitten by a snake. If a person does not show unwavering loyalty to their cage, they are untrustworthy and become disposable. When a Jinchuriki ceases to be the good little soldier that they are designed to be, we are sentenced to death until a more suitable and loyal vessel is found. Can you say unequivocally that this is not the case? Uzu, you say? Jiraiya murmured. After a few awkward moments of silence, he returned his gaze to his godson. When would you like to leave? The following afternoon. I have a few things to finish before I leave. Let's say it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and you're at the West Gate. Deal. I'll go tell Sensei. Naruto dropped the privacy seals and vanished, returning to his intended destination. Jiraiya shook his head and dashed for the Hokage Tower after staring at the spot where Naruto had just been a few moments before. He required answers. Naruto, for example. When Naruto arrived at Sasuke's house, he opened a closed window and entered the living room. He dropped onto Sasuke's couch after closing the window once more and locking it. He barely noticed the door opening and Sasuke removing his shoes. He only moved when Sasuke came to a halt in front of him. I'm guessing you ran into Jiraiya today. Did you at least get permission to train in Uzu? Yes, but I have to spend the entire month with Jiraiya watching me. I'll make it, but did you and Kakashi make any progress on your training plans for the coming month? Yeah. He said he'd sneak me out of Konoha if necessary so we could practice my more destructive techniques. You should visit Uzu. There is plenty of room to avoid each other there. We could. How are you going to get anything done with Jiraiya? If necessary, I could use a sleep seal and a memory modifier. However, I believe there should be an Uzumaki-only training ground where I could avoid him if necessary. I see. Do you know what Hinata plans to work on this month? I may have hinted that the Byakugan isn't finished and that it can grow stronger. Tricky. Yup. After a few more moments of silence, Sasuke sighed and turned to face the window. There have been far too many changes. We have no idea how the finals will play out or when the attack will begin. How much more is it now impossible to predict and prevent with the changes we've seen? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how we missed the change in passing teams. Or the fact that Kumo had a team this time around in the exams. Plus, I still need to settle Karen, and I'm thinking about taking her to Uzu with me. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Karen was able to awaken the clan's chakra chains in order to reach you during the war. I'm hoping that we'll be able to activate and control them together. A solid strategy. I'm flattered she'd go so far for me. It's just a shame I'll never be able to reciprocate her feelings. Don't worry, I'll make sure she never falls for your chakra again. Naruto burst out laughing. After a few moments of light-hearted laughter, the two said goodnight and drifted off to sleep. In the meantime, Jiraiya. Did you know he was communicating with the Nine Tails, sensei? Who is he? Hiruzen choked, nearly swallowing his pipe. The kid is well versed in his parents' names, my role as godfather, and who knows what else. He also stated that he trusted Kyuubi more than the entire village because Kyuubi was the only one who had been truthful with him. Kyorin Hiruzen looked over at the portraits of the former Hokage on the wall. How did things get this out of hand? That's what I'm curious about. We must tighten the seal. Jiraiya, that is our only option. At this point, Sensei, it's out of the question. Should anyone attempt it, he has already made one threat. I don't know about you, but I'd rather not be permanently removed from my godson's life. Jiraiya, some sacrifices must be made. That seal should be tightened. We can't let him continue talking to the Nine Tails. It would be far too dangerous, especially given his recent strange behavior. He's been invoking a lot of the Uzu Konoha Treaty lately, and I've mostly been unable to do anything but watch as he does whatever he wants. I wouldn't be surprised if he was persuaded to leave the Hidden Leaf by the Nine Tails. He has already expressed an interest in resurrecting Uzu. Uzu Shiogakure or, more specifically, the Uzumaki clan, Sensei. Jiraiya inquired, then groaned. Didn't you make a huge mistake? Please Jiraiya, it's not like you're here to look after him. As a result, you're equally to blame. Don't try that with me, Sensei. You know exactly why I wasn't here. Unless you know someone who can manage my spy network. The two stared at each other in silence as the standoff continued. For the next month, I'll be accompanying Naruto to Uzu so he can train Sensei. As he put it, it's the very least I can do as his godfather. Jiraiya declared emphatically. The only sound heard as he turned and left the room was the door closing. Hiruzen sagged in his chair, feeling nearly 2 decades older. He sighed as he returned his gaze to the portraits. What do you think, Sensei? Is it just me who has these issues, or is it worse than other countries because the source of the issues is in Uzumaki? The following day. The afternoon seemed to arrive almost instantly for Jiraiya and Naruto. They almost arrived at the gate at the same time. Only Naruto wasn't by himself. A redhead girl with glasses stood beside him, almost nervous about her presence. This is Karen, my cousin. She will accompany us on this trip. She is neither a Konoha shinobi nor subject to Konoha's authority. Naruto said this with finality, and the Sannin nodded silently. The trio left the village without saying anything else. The journey was silent, and it appeared as if they were strangers traveling in the same direction rather than a team. Naruto was lost in thought, hoping that the scrolls he had left behind for the rookies would be sufficient for the impending invasion. Yes, they had regained their 4th and 5th war strength, but with so many things changing, he wasn't sure it would be enough. Karen was curious about Uzu and whether there was anything there that could remove the bite marks on her arms. She despised the reminders of her time in Kusa and hoped they wouldn't be permanent scars. She blushed slightly as she looked to her side at her cousin. He had the warmest, most inviting chakra she'd ever felt, and it seemed to grow stronger by the day. Be careful, Karen, not to confuse an attraction to soothing chakra with an attraction to the person who possesses it. If you do this, you will miss out on true love. She nodded in understanding, starting and then blushing at being caught. Jiraiya's thoughts were still lingering on the conversation he had with his sensei the night before. Was the Sandaime truly so callous as to suggest that he forego his one and only chance to be present in his godson's life because of a perfectly justified event? Sure, he had ruined his relationship with his youngest son, but that didn't mean everyone else's relationships had to suffer as well, did it? He sighed as he looked to the horizon. The month was going to be long. The journey to Nami was made in silence, which Naruto preferred. He wasn't sure what he should do about Jiraiya or his relationship. He knew it would never be the same as it once was, but then what could it be? Would Jiraiya be willing to do whatever it took to mend their relationship? Or would he go back to his old ways as soon as possible? The questions that raced through his mind seemed interminable, with no end in sight. This only served to raise more concerns. The journey was terrifying for Jiraiya. He didn't know what to say to his godson, or if he should say anything at all. The Sannin was truly perplexed and speechless. He hadn't felt this bad in a long time, and he despised every second of it. He needed to make an effort to get to know his godson, or he would have failed at almost everything in his life. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had mostly just followed the people around him and had never done anything contrary. He'd never tried to forge his own identity, and it scared him. For the first time in his life, he questioned who he was and whether he truly desired to be that person. Karen was taken aback by the sights and the lingering chakra she could detect in the areas they passed through. She was aware of the tension between the two males in the group and didn't want to cause any problems by asking. Something had obviously happened between them, and they needed time to work it out. Her confusion was making matters worse. Her thoughts returned to the marks on her arm, and she cursed Kusagakure silently. In a way, she was also angry at her mother for revealing their capabilities without considering the consequences for either of them. "Hey Uzumaki-sama, welcome back," a man called, startling all three into silence. Naruto smiled and walked over to him. "How are things going, Kenji?" Naruto inquired. "Good. We've been doing much better since Gado's trial and execution, and we owe it all to your team. Who are your companions?" "This is my godfather Jiraiya, and this is Karen Uzumaki," he announced cheerfully. Kenji did a double take when he saw the unusual group and his eyes widened. "Well, two Uzumaki have returned to these lands now, and it's good to meet you, Uzumaki Heim," he said cheerfully. "I was told that Nami had the most direct and fastest route to Uzu, and that almost all, if not all, experienced fishermen knew how to get there. Is this true?" "Sure is. Nami used to trade with Uzu frequently, so anyone going that way had to know how to get there. I wanted to go there to train for my Chunin exams matches. The only other option would take at least 5 more hours, and I can't afford to lose that much time in my training. Alright, I'll take you over there myself. How does that sound?" "Thank you, and please disregard the Uzumaki-sama nonsense. I'm not one for formalities." "Perhaps," groaning Naruto followed the cheerful man and shook his head. They wouldn't let up on the formalities. They were back on the shores of Uzushiogakure an hour and a half later. "When are you coming back across?" "Within the next 29 days. "I see. What time will I come pick you up?" Naruto smiled and nodded. "How about 12 p.m.? "Sounds good. I'll try to get the Farah's call system back up and running so you can come across whenever you want, though you may have to activate it from this side. All I know for sure is that it works with seals, so I may not be able to do much." "It's fine. I'll look at it when I get a chance." Waving goodbye, Naruto returned to the ruins and began walking through them again. The second time around was much better, and he didn't feel his heart breaking. It's possible that there were no human remains on the ground this time. "So this is Uzushiogakure," Karen said quietly. "What is this strange feeling I'm having?" "It used to be said that no matter how long the Uzumaki were gone, they would always feel welcome in Uzu because it was their home," Jiraiya said quietly. "It has to be true because you've never been here before, right?" "Never, I prefer the warmth." "I know how you feel," Naruto remarked as he came to a halt in the middle of the village and turned to Jiraiya. "I'm not sure if I can trust you. I'm not even sure if it's possible to have any kind of relationship with you, but I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt right now. As you are most likely aware by now, Konoha has been infiltrated by Orochimaru. What many don't know is that the snake is planning to invade the village in 1 month's time. Even if the village knew, the Sandaime would only inform. As his teammate, you know how he fights and the basics of his thought pattern. You can teach us how to fight him. You have already trained powerful shinobi. There is no reason that you can't get us up to speed quickly, especially once Karen has the chakra required for the Cage Bunshin. I need to be ready to fight a Jinchuriki in the exams and be able to protect the village and the stadium while doing so. How do you know everything? Jinchuriki can sense one another, which is why Orochimaru's appearance didn't force the exams to be cancelled or even delayed. Orochimaru threatened the village if they were because he wants to destroy Konoha when they have the most to lose if they survive. As for the rest of it, I'll tell you when you have my complete trust. There are those who already know and agree with me. So what is it going to be? It didn't take him long to make up his mind about what he was going to do. Give me a complete list of everything you two know, and then we'll spar to see where your current level is, and I'll devise a training plan from there, Naruto said, smiling for the first time at his godfather. Together with Sasuke and Kakashi. I must say, Sasuke, Naruto's seal works quite well. Any problems so far? None. Will we be visiting Uzu at any time? Perhaps, depending on whether we can lose our tails. It appears Danzo and the Sandaime weren't content with knowing you were safe. Or you have also come under suspicion. I'll survive. Idiot, when it comes to getting rid of them, are they all root or is there some normal Anbu mixed in? It appears that they are all root. Good, Sasuke said as he leapt from a tree branch and turned in midair. Senbon Chidori. A new variant? Sort of, it still takes a lot out of me, to think that this used to be easy for me, Sasuke grumbled as the bodies of the root nin fell to the forest floor, each with a senbon-shaped hole in their head. The rest of the journey was uneventful, and as they settled in for the night, Sasuke stretched out and yawned. At the boys' antics, Kakashi simply smiled and shook his head. Tell me, Sasuke, was I a good teacher the first time? Sasuke asked, blinking and tilting his head. Both yes and no. What exactly does that mean? You were so focused on repaying your debt to Obito that you forgot about the rest of the team. The only one who really got any training from you in the beginning was me, and by the time I abandoned the village, Naruto and Sakura were so far behind they might as well have just left the academy. Naruto really didn't have much going into the Fourth War. Everyone was so focused on having the Jinchuriki that they forgot about the shinobi that contained the beast. Most of his training was either the Rasengan and Kyuubi's chakra. He himself didn't have any skills he could really use if you took the ability to use both of them away from him. You see, that's why you weren't a good teacher. What? You get so caught up in your thoughts of the past that you forget about the present and the future. You start living in the past and that is what trips you up all the time. This time around you were an awesome teacher, especially since we didn't give you a choice but to try. Didn't you learn that lesson the hard way? The Dobi literally beat it into me, over and over. Ouch, so what do you want to concentrate on? Well, with a very toned-down version of the Shadow Clone training method that the Dobi uses, I want to focus on improving my taijutsu and reserves. Using my best techniques takes more chakra than I have at the moment, and using them once usually takes me out of the fight even if it doesn't look like it. I see. Let's also work on expanding your jutsu repertoire. Low-level techniques can be just as lethal when used correctly, and from what I've seen, you and Naruto definitely lack in non-village destroying jutsu, even with the work we've been doing on that. True. We'll start first thing in the morning, Sasuke. Get some rest. Hinata. Father, could I please have a moment of your time? Come in, Hinata, she said softly, taking a seat in front of her father's desk and taking a moment to control her breathing and formulate exactly what she wanted to say. Does it seem possible that the Byakugan isn't finished? What exactly do you mean? Is it possible for the Byakugan to evolve in the same way that the Sharingan has? No, I don't think so. Is that because it never happened, or because the Hyuga refused to be like the Uchiha, so they never tried? Hiyashi blinked and set down the pen he was holding. He studied the girl in front of him intently. Hinata had become more assertive and aggressive in her spars since the Uzumaki boy changed and she began training with him. In reality, she had been winning all of them. Something that had enraged the clan because they were certain Hanabi would be named heiress because she was so much better at the Juken. Nonetheless, Hinata had not only caught up to her, but had soared past her. Nobody knew who would be named heiress, and the elders had stopped demanding that one be marked. He would be eternally grateful for the last part. What do you want, Hinata? Knowledge. I want to get into the sealed part of the archives to look at our ancestors' records to see what they have to say about the Byakugan. Right now, everything that we have access to is censored by the elders to prevent anything that could prove our relationship to the Uchiha from being found. I think the answers that I am looking for are in there. I need you to open the door though. Hiyashi pondered the request in his mind. Hinata's words made sense. Their forefathers had done everything possible to disprove that the Uchiha and Hyuga were distantly related. If the Byakugan was capable of evolution, it would only strengthen the link. Furthermore, it would refute the claim that the Byakugan was complete upon activation, as opposed to the Sharingan, which required training to reach full maturity. I'll allow it for an hour, but if you don't find anything, you'll have to abandon this stupid quest. You sound like elders now, father, Hinata said calmly, causing Hiyashi to blink. The pursuit of knowledge and the ability to change in order to become stronger is how humans have survived for so long. The fact that the clan is attempting to prevent that from happening only brings the clan closer to destruction. After all, we are only alive because our ancestors changed the way they looked at medicine. Hiyashi found himself agreeing with her, and before he knew it, he was standing in front of the door. Remember, only an hour. As soon as the seal was broken, Hinata darted in before he could blink. Hinata created several shadow clones and sent them searching once she was out of sight of her father. She knew roughly where she needed to look. In that way, the clan was predictable. The oldest records would be kept in the back, hidden in a small compartment designed to keep them hidden. The only problem was that she had only an hour to find the compartment. After 40 minutes, Hinata was becoming increasingly dissatisfied. Naruto would never lie to her about something as important as this. As she moved another stack of census records, she noticed a hidden door and her frown faded. She opened it and went deeper into the room, gaping as she saw hundreds of scrolls lining the wall. They were all very old, and many of them bore the crest of another clan rather than the Hyuga. Walking over to the area with the oldest records, he took the first scroll and attempted to open it, only to be blocked by a blood seal. She pricked her finger and watched as it quickly opened. Her eyes widened as she read, as she adjusted the chakra orb she was using for light. The act continues with each new sentence. She sat on the floor and stared at all of the records around her by the end of the scroll. As she considered her clan's actions over the years and the consequences they refused to see or acknowledge, she had only one thought. Fools. They're all fools, she murmured, returning her gaze to the scroll. Hinata, time is up, her father said. She groaned and smirked as she looked around the room. It was a gamble in a Naruto-style maneuver, but she was willing to take the risk. Hiyashi simply nodded at Hinata's exit and resealed the room after her. He didn't need to ask if she found anything because her lack of scrolls seemed self-explanatory, and she disappeared back into his office. Never noticing the slight grin on her face. Running to her room and gathering her training supplies, she announced that she was going to training and quickly left the compound. She darted from road to road, checking to see if she was being followed by her retainer, and when she was certain she wasn't, she vaulted over the gate to Training Field 0. She smiled wider after she had put some distance between herself and the fence and knew she couldn't be seen by the Byakugans or any of the Anbu patrols. After a puff of smoke, Hinata nodded to her shadow clone before the original vanished, revealing her to be a clone as well. After a few seconds, another puff of smoke appeared, and she was holding the scroll she had been studying. Hinata had sent a clone up to her father in her place, knowing there hadn't been nearly enough time to seal the scrolls or search through them for the ones she needed. He thought nothing of it and let it go because he never considered her to have cloned herself. It was a gamble because she had no way of knowing if the room was sealed in such a way that she couldn't get out of it. Her gamble had paid off, and she examined the object in her other hand. It contained all of the scrolls she had discovered in the hidden room. She had tried to seal all of them before her clone dispelled her, telling her that they would do the replacement. Sitting back against a tree, she began to reread the scroll, and as she did, she realized why they had sealed everything away. They were enraged and envious that they hadn't been able to access the knowledge contained within them. Everyone who had attempted to open the scroll, which was more of a letter to be honest, had been deemed unworthy by her clan's founder. However, it had deemed her worthy, and she refused to squander this opportunity to show the clan how they had been slowly destroying themselves by adhering to tradition. Naruto-kun, I'm getting closer to my goal of uniting the clan and removing the cursed seal. Soon, I'll be able to bring the clan back together as a family. I'm still not sure what to do about those who refuse to go quietly, but I know I'll find a way to demonstrate why this change is necessary. Nobody, not even my grandfather, will be able to stop me. Meanwhile, the other rookies in the village were also approaching their training with the same zeal. Ino was quietly working on an exercise suggested by Naruto in the Yamanaka household. She was attempting to separate her yin and yang chakras so that they could be used separately. He reasoned that no one in the Senju clan had developed the Mokuton because it wasn't a bloodline but rather an innate ability to manipulate his yang chakra to his will. By that logic, anyone who possesses water, earth, and yang should be able to achieve the same results. She wasn't having much luck, but she was adamant about succeeding. If only to disprove her father. When she told him what she was planning, he tried to talk her out of it, telling her that that wasn't how it worked and that Naruto shouldn't have filled her head with such a fairy tale. But she was certain. She knew she'd be useless against Fu if she succeeded, but she was going to try anyway. Furthermore, no one would expect it, making it a good trump to use. Fu was already aware of her poisons, and she wasn't stupid enough to use clan techniques against a Jinchuriki. She and Fu had an affinity, and she desperately needed something to surprise her. She smirked at the box next to her as she looked to her side. The item inside was something she'd wanted to try and had picked it up without telling anyone. She had one ace even if she couldn't use the Mokuton. But she didn't want to rely on it. There wasn't nearly enough time to perfect the technique. But it was a start. Shikamaru was also experimenting. He was aware that the clan's jutsu were easily dispelled with enough light, so he was attempting to find a way to solidify them. It's almost as if you're manifesting them into physical form. He could use it with or without the light. He was also attempting to combine his fire and earth releases with his clan's shadow jutsu. He was aware that his mother was concerned about his new attitude toward training and his behavior, but he didn't have time to be concerned. He needed to stop an invasion and save the world. He could look at clouds another time. Shino was struggling the most with his training. He had decided to turn one of the clan's weaknesses into a strength. He was currently collaborating with his clan to breed a fire-resistant Kikaichu. From there, he hoped to combine them with his fire, earth, and yang release in order to truly take command of a battle and catch enemies off guard. He believed that if he had been able to do so against Hiyari, he would have been of greater assistance to Hinata. He reminded himself, with a glance to the side, that he needed to sign the Mantis contract and pass their trial. He wanted to at least ask the summons if they would consider becoming the clan's summons rather than just passing from wielder to wielder who may or may not betray them. He thought the mantises were a good fit for the clan's specialty and that there was no harm in trying. Lee was working himself to the bone in order to advance his limited abilities to the next level. Because of his inability to use jutsu, he was unable to work on the elements that they had tested for in order to create a new trump card, unlike the other genin. He could, however, learn new taijutsu styles and weapons to surprise them. He refused to hold back the team because he couldn't use chakra like they could. In all honesty, he needed something that would allow him to compete against both ninjutsu specialists and genjutsu specialists. He gritted his teeth, channeled what little chakra he could, and held his breath as he looked down at the object in his hand. A grin slowly spread across his face, and he turned to face Guy, who was crying. He was getting closer to his goal. Fu was also practicing her jutsu because she had never realized how much she relied on Chome until she was forced to use her own ability. She never wanted to go back to fighting her battles with Chome's power. Furthermore, as she concentrated on the strokes she was making on the paper in front of her, she hoped to do her Uzumaki ancestors proud. Fuinjutsu was more difficult for her than it was for Naruto, but she refused to give up. She set down her brush and looked out the window, where her clones were training with either Haku or Zabuza. Haku had expressed a desire to gain physical strength, and Fu had promised to assist in any way she could. By the end of the month, she'd be one step closer to becoming Chome's partner rather than just her vessel. Neji was panting heavily and staring at the lake in front of him. He knew Hinata wouldn't limit herself to Juken, and he had to respect that. He could see that she was working hard to get him out of his cage. So he was doing the best he could. He was preparing to give her the best fight he could. Despite having worked on ninjutsu while training with Kakashi, he found ninjutsu to be much more difficult than taijutsu. Hinata, on the other hand, believed the opposite. He still refused to give up. Standing up again, he began weaving the seals for the jutsu he was practicing with renewed zeal. He refused to leave until he had prevented his father's grave from being desecrated. Ten was having a nervous breakdown. She had no idea how she was going to take down a Jinchuriki. She could tell she was outmatched in chakra capacity, endurance, stamina, and healing speed just by watching Naruto and Fu train. As she continued to panic, she remembered her many discussions with Naruto about her future self's abilities. In addition to the fights he had as a child. When it finally clicked. She might not win, but she could cause some havoc. Especially if he was as reliant on one thing or his biju as Fu was when they first began training together. She grabbed her belongings, called out to her father, and dashed off to one of the many training fields. She'd be able to pull it off. She didn't have much of a choice if she wanted to live.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.